Why was everyone staring at her again? Emily Brooks could feel the heat of their whispers before she even reached her locker. The echoing laughter, the half-hidden smiles. It was the kind of cruelty that didn't need volume to hurt. Just a glance, a tone, a perfectly timed smirk. Lincoln High was supposed to be ordinary. A place where she could blend in, survive the hours between classes, and maybe, just maybe, feel like she belonged. But that Thursday morning, she was everyone's favorite joke again. All because of her mom. Emily's grip tightened on the strap of her backpack as she moved through the crowded hall. She could hear it trailing behind her, snippets of voices trying to sound casual, trying to hide laughter. Her mom's a Navy SEAL, right? Yeah, sure. What's next? Her dad's Batman. It stung because it wasn't just teasing. It was disbelief, mockery, that cruel little twist people gave the truth when it didn't fit their small idea of the world. She wanted to turn around, to say something, but the words never came easy for her, not like they did for them. She just kept walking, head down, pretending not to care, pretending she didn't hear. By the time she reached the cafeteria, her chest already felt tight. The sound of clattering trays and voices melted into a blur. She found her usual seat in the far corner, a lonely table next to the vending machines, where the flickering light cast strange shadows on the floor. She'd barely opened her lunchbox when she heard them approach. Three girls, always together, always watching. "Hey, Emily," one of them said, her voice syrup-sweet but sharp underneath. "So, your mom's a Navy SEAL, huh?" Emily froze mid-bite. She knew that tone. It wasn't curiosity, it was performance. "Yeah," she said softly, trying to sound calm. "She was." The girl Marcy tilted her head like a cat playing with a cornered mouse. "Oh, was she? That's adorable. Did she, like, fight pirates or something?" Laughter erupted around them, the kind that cuts deep because it's meant to. Emily's face burned, but she didn't look away. "She doesn't really talk about it," she murmured. "But yes, she was." That only made them laugh harder. "Sure, honey, and my dad's James Bond." The words hit harder than they should have, because part of Emily wanted to laugh too, to pretend she didn't care. But another part of her, the one that remembered quiet nights, the sound of her mom running drills in the backyard, the way she'd stare at old medals when she thought no one was watching, that part wanted to scream. Instead, she just sat there, staring at her lunch until it blurred. It wasn't fair. Her mom was a SEAL, the real thing, but how could she prove it? She didn't have photos, uniforms, or anything flashy. Just scars, old gear locked away in a box, and a mother who never boasted about the things she'd done. To Stephanie Brooks, the past wasn't something to brag about. It was something to carry. Emily pushed her tray aside and stood up before they could see the tears in her eyes. That afternoon, she waited in the parking lot, watching cars leave one by one. The air smelled faintly of rain, heavy with the weight of things unsaid. When her mom's old black Jeep finally pulled up, Emily hesitated before getting in. Stephanie Brooks looked like any other mom, casual jacket, faded jeans, hair tied back. No one would guess what she'd done, where she'd been, or what she'd lost. But Emily knew. The scars on her hands, the precision in her movements, the way she always sat facing exits, the distant look in her eyes when thunder rolled in. "Hey, sweetheart," Stephanie said, smiling gently. "Rough day." Emily hesitated. They don't believe you were a SEAL." Stephanie's hands paused on the steering wheel. Then she gave a small, slow smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "They don't have to believe," she said softly. "The truth doesn't need an audience." "I know," Emily whispered, "but they make fun of you, of us." For a moment the car was silent except for the soft ticking of the cooling engine. Then Stephanie looked at her daughter, the same eyes, same quiet strength, and said something Emily would never forget. "Sometimes lessons need witnesses." That night Emily couldn't sleep. She lay awake listening to the rain tapping softly against the window. The faint glow of streetlights traced patterns across her ceiling. Down the hall, she could hear her mom moving quietly, slow, deliberate, like someone still trained for missions that no longer came. She thought about the girls at school, the laughter, the humiliation, the helplessness. Then she thought about her mom's words, lessons, witnesses. What did that mean? When she finally drifted into sleep, she dreamed of ocean waves and gunmetal skis, of her mother standing on the deck of a ship, wind tearing through her hair, her eyes steady as storm clouds raged around her. In the dream, she wasn't just a mom, she was something elemental, a force. When Emily woke, her pillow was damp with tears she didn't remember shedding. The next morning, something felt different. It wasn't just the air, it was the silence before the storm. Lincoln High was never quiet, not at that hour, but as Emily walked toward the front entrance, she noticed teachers standing still, phones half raised, faces uncertain. Then she heard it, the low hum of engines. A row of black SUVs lined the curb, perfectly aligned, windows tinted, engines idling in sync. Emily's heart skipped. Her mom's Jeep was parked beside them. What's going on?" she whispered to herself. The doors of the SUVs opened. One by one, figures stepped out. Men and women dressed in navy blue shirts, each bearing a gold trident emblem on the chest, the unmistakable mark of the United States Navy SEALs. The sight alone was enough to freeze the courtyard. Even the bullies, the teachers, the gossiping clusters of students, everyone went silent. At the front of them, walking with calm, deliberate grace, was Stephanie Brooks. Emily's breath caught. Her mother looked different. The same jeans, the same jacket, but something about her posture had changed. Every step carried weight, purpose, quiet authority. The kind you couldn't fake. She moved like someone who'd led people through chaos and brought them back alive. "Mom," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Stephanie didn't look at her yet. She kept walking, eyes forward, shoulders squared, as the 30 SEALs followed in perfect formation. The crowd parted instinctively, silence heavy as thunderclouds. Inside the cafeteria, the bullies from yesterday were laughing again, oblivious to the shifting air outside, until the doors opened. And the world stopped. Stephanie Brooks stepped inside first, flanked by 30 Navy SEALs who moved with the silent precision of a unit that didn't need orders to function. Every eye turned, every sound died. Marcy, the ringleader, froze mid-sentence. The half-smile on her lips faltered and vanished. "Good morning," Stephanie said calmly. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "I hear there's been some confusion about who I am." No one moved. She glanced behind her. "Team, meet my daughter's school." In perfect unison, the SEALs lined up along the cafeteria wall, boots striking tile with crisp rhythm. The sound echoed like thunder in the still air. Even Principal Reynolds, a man who once prided himself on being unflappable, stood wide-eyed near the entrance. Stephanie rolled up her sleeve, revealing a faded tattoo, an eagle clutching a trident and anchor, the mark of the SEALs, etched over a pale scar. "I don't talk much about what I did," she said softly, "because service isn't about proving, it's about protecting." Her gaze swept the room, pausing on Marcy and her friends. "But today, I'm here for my daughter, to remind her and you that truth doesn't need permission to exist." The cafeteria was so quiet that even the sound of someone breathing felt loud. Emily stood near the back, hands trembling, heart pounding. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of being seen. Her mom turned, locking eyes with her for a moment. A silent exchange, pride, love, understanding. Then she turned back to the students. "Some of you might think heroism looks like a movie. Explosions, medals, glory, but real strength, real courage, looks like standing up for what's right when no one believes you." No one laughed now. Even Marcy's eyes were wet. And for the first time, Emily felt something shift. The laughter that haunted her yesterday was gone, replaced by reverence, by awe. Something deeper than fear, respect. Outside, the morning sun caught the seal tridents, scattering gold light across the floor like fire. That was the morning Lincoln High changed forever. No one knew it yet, but the lesson Stephanie Brooks had just begun teaching would echo through every hallway, every whispered rumor, every quiet act of courage that would follow. Because sometimes silence isn't strength. Sometimes silence is waiting patiently for the right moment to speak. And when it finally does, the world listens. What kind of woman could silence a room without raising her voice? The question echoed long after Stephanie Brooks and her SEAL team left the cafeteria. For hours, Lincoln High was quieter than it had ever been. The whispers, the laughter, the gossip, they all vanished. Students sat at their desks in a daze, retelling what they'd seen like a myth passed in hushed tones. Emily walked the halls like someone caught between two worlds, the invisible girl and the daughter of someone extraordinary. Every step felt lighter, yet heavier, pride mixed with confusion, gratitude tangled with guilt. Had her mom really done all that for her? By the time the last bell rang, Emily found herself waiting again. Same parking lot, same sky, but everything felt different. Her mom's Jeep rolled up, headlights cutting through the afternoon light. Stephanie stepped out, calm as always, sunglasses glinting against the sun. But there was something softer in her expression this time, a quiet that came after a storm. Emily met her halfway. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. Stephanie smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but sometimes silence needs a reminder that it's not weakness." "They won't ever forget," Emily said, half in awe, half in disbelief. "They're not supposed to." For a moment neither spoke. A plane passed high overhead, leaving a thin white scar across the sky. Stephanie followed it with her eyes, lost in thought. "Do you ever miss it?" Emily asked. "The Navy?" Stephanie exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that carried years of weight. "Every day, and not at all." Emily frowned. "How can it be both?" Her mother looked at her, eyes distant yet tender. "Because you can miss the mission, but not the ghosts that come with it." That night, as the house fell quiet, Emily found herself drawn to the attic. The air smelled faintly of cedar and dust. In the corner sat a wooden chest, dark, worn, the edges carved with faint initials, SB. She hesitated, then lifted the lid. Inside were fragments of a life she'd only guessed at. A folded uniform, still smelling faintly of ocean salt and oil. A handful of medals, bronze, silver, and one wrapped in cloth as though too sacred to display. Old photographs. A younger Stephanie, her hair shorter, her expression harder, standing beside teammates in desert camouflage. Their faces blurred with time, but their eyes sharp, alive, fierce. And beneath it all, her mother's SEAL trident. Emily held it gently in her palm, cold, heavy, real. There was a letter tucked beside it, edges frayed from years of being opened and reread. She recognized her mom's handwriting, neat, precise, with the kind of care that came from someone who measured every word before writing it. She unfolded it slowly. "To whoever finds this. If it's Emily, then I guess you're old enough now to know that being a SEAL isn't the hardest part. Leaving is. The world teaches us to fight enemies we can see, but the hardest battles are the ones that follow us home. You'll hear stories about heroes, medals, victories, but no one tells you about the silence after the mission, when the adrenaline fades, and you're left wondering who you became in the process. If I ever seem distant, it's not because I don't care. It's because I'm still learning how to exist in peace after living in chaos. You saved me from that, in ways you'll never understand." "Mom." Emily pressed the letter to her chest, her eyes stinging. She thought of her mom's calm face that morning, of the confidence, the control. She looked like a mountain that couldn't be shaken. But this letter, this glimpse behind the armor, showed something else. A woman who'd carried storms inside her, yet still smiled for her daughter. The next day, news spread fast. The cafeteria incident had gone viral. Someone had filmed the entire thing, 30 SEALs entering in formation, Stephanie's calm speech, the trident tattoo, the silent salute. It had exploded across social media under the caption, "When a Navy SEAL mom shows up to defend her daughter." Millions of views, thousands of comments. Some called it inspiring, others called it staged. But for Emily, it wasn't about the internet. It was about finally seeing her mom for who she really was, not the stories, not the rumors, but the quiet truth of it. Still, something lingered, a question she couldn't shake. Why had her mom left the Navy? That evening, while helping clear the dinner table, Emily asked softly, "Mom, when did you decide to stop being a SEAL?" Stephanie froze mid-motion, the glass in her hand catching light like a shard. Then she set it down carefully. "There's no clean stop," she said after a moment. "You leave the uniform, but the uniform doesn't leave you." "But why?" Her mother's eyes softened. "Because sometimes survival means walking away before the next mission takes what's left of you." She hesitated. Then, almost to herself, she added, "Our last operation went sideways. I lost good people, my team, my family. I thought I could live with that, but the truth is, you don't live with it, you live after it." Emily didn't speak. She just reached out and took her mom's hand. Stephanie squeezed it back, eyes glistening but steady. "You were my reason to stop, my reason to come home." For a long time, neither of them said another word. The only sound was the ticking of the kitchen clock, a quiet metronome to everything unspoken between them. Days passed. The laughter at school stopped entirely, not because people were afraid, but because something had changed. The same girls who once mocked Emily now looked at her differently, not with fear but with understanding. Marcy approached her one afternoon, fidgeting with her backpack strap. "Hey," she said awkwardly, "I just wanted to say I'm sorry about everything." Emily studied her for a moment. The apology felt real, small but real. "It's okay," she said. "You didn't know." Marcy nodded quickly, relief washing over her. "Your mom's, wow, she's incredible." Emily smiled softly. "Yeah, she is." That evening, Stephanie drove them to a small veterans center on the edge of town. The building was quiet, its walls lined with photos, faces of men and women, young and old, who'd once carried the same weight. Inside, a few people gathered in folding chairs, talking softly. Emily recognized some of them from the school cafeteria, the SEALs. They greeted Stephanie with hugs, nods, the kind of respect that went beyond words. "Good to see you back, Brooks," one of them said. "Didn't think you show," another added, smiling faintly. Stephanie shrugged, figured it was time. Emily sat quietly, watching them. The way they spoke, the way they moved, it wasn't like normal people. They carried themselves like people who'd lived through something together, something no one else could quite understand. Then a man stood to speak, a tall SEAL with a prosthetic arm and a calm voice that filled the room. He nodded toward Stephanie. "She saved my life once," he said. "Twice, actually. She'll never tell you that, she never takes credit for anything. But when we were pinned down in Kandahar, she dragged me 50 yards under fire. Didn't flinch. Didn't slow down, she just said, 'You're not dying on my watch.'" A quiet murmur rippled through the room. Stephanie looked down, embarrassed. "You'd have done the same." "Yeah," he said softly, "but you did it." Emily watched her mother lower her gaze, her jaw tight. Not proud, haunted. When they left, the sun had already set. The drive home was silent, the radio off. The sky burned orange over the horizon. At a stoplight, Stephanie finally spoke. "Those people, they remind me of who I was," she said. "But you remind me of who I'm still becoming." Emily smiled faintly. "You know, everyone at school keeps talking about you. You're kind of a legend now." Stephanie chuckled quietly. Legends are just stories people tell because they don't understand the pain behind them. She reached over, brushing Emily's hair behind her ear. The truth is, kid, I'd trade every medal I ever earned for the day you look at yourself and see the same strength I see in you. Emily's throat tightened. I'm not strong like you. Her mom looked at her. You already are, you just don't know it yet. That night, Emily sat at her desk, scrolling through the viral video again. There was her mom, calm, composed, fearless. But the camera didn't catch the small things. The tremor in her hands after it was over. The deep breath before stepping inside the school. The pain behind the eyes of someone who'd seen too much. People saw a Navy SEAL. Emily saw her mother, a woman still fighting battles no one else could see. And somewhere deep inside, a spark lit. Maybe strength wasn't about medals, or uniforms, or making people believe. Maybe it was about quiet acts that didn't need applause, about standing tall when no one else would, about walking into fear, not for glory but for love. The kind of love that shows up. The kind that brings 30 SEALs to a high school cafeteria because a daughter was hurting. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Stephanie sat alone on the porch, mug of coffee in her hands, eyes fixed on the dark horizon. She could still hear the echoes, gunfire in the desert, the sound of a helicopter fatting, the voices of those she'd lost. But then from inside came laughter, Emily's laughter. And for the first time in a long while, Stephanie smiled. The ghosts quieted, because home, finally, was louder than war. Why did the past never stay buried? Even in peace, Stephanie Brooks could still hear it, the echoes of her last mission. They came in flashes, the metallic sting of gunpowder, the rhythmic thud of rotor blades, the voice of command in her ear, calm, professional, doomed. It was supposed to be routine. Extraction in hostile terrain, minimal resistance. But anyone who's lived through enough operations knows routine is a dangerous word. Stephanie lay awake that night, the house silent around her, eyes tracing the faint cracks in the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. It never did when her mind wandered back there, to the valley, the sand, the sound of her teammates' breath just before it stopped. She turned, restless. On the nightstand sat a picture of Emily, 4 years old, missing a front tooth, laughing at something only kids could find funny. Stephanie's chest tightened. That photo had been with her on every deployment. She used to tuck it inside her vest, her good luck charm, her reason to come home. But that last mission changed everything. Afghanistan, 2013. The night sky was black velvet, split by faint streaks of tracer fire in the distance. Operation name, Iron Veil. Their team, Echo 9, was tasked with extracting a captured informant from a fortified compound in Nuristan province. Small unit, low visibility, zero backup. Stephanie had led the entry unit. Her call sign was Raven. The plan had been clean, fast in, fast out. It was. Halfway through extraction, their comms went dark. An ambush, perfectly timed, cut off their escape route. Gunfire erupted from every direction. The air turned to chaos. Raven, fall back, came the voice through static. But she couldn't. She could see Ramirez, one of hers, down in the open, bleeding out. Stephanie had choices. Orders said retreat. Her conscience said otherwise. She moved before thinking, crawled through fire, through the sound of bullets ricocheting off stone, dragged Ramirez by his vest, inch by inch, until her gloves were slick with blood. She barely made it behind cover when the explosion hit. The world turned white. When she woke, everything was smoke and silence. Ramirez was gone, 3 others missing. Command thought the team was lost. But Stephanie refused to die there. She scavenged what she could, rallied the survivors, and led them through enemy territory for 48 straight hours without food, water, or rest. When rescue finally came, she was the last to board the helicopter, half conscious, half broken, still holding what was left of Ramirez's tag. They called her a hero. She called it failure. Now, sitting in the quiet of her kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator her only company, Stephanie's hands trembled slightly as she lifted her coffee mug. The years hadn't dulled the memories. They just buried them under quieter routines, school lunches, grocery lists, PTA meetings. Things that felt small but saved her life one ordinary day at a time. Still, some nights she'd find herself gripping the edge of the sink, staring out the window, waiting for the desert to fade from her mind. It never fully did. That's why she'd left the service. Not because she couldn't keep going, but because she couldn't keep coming back as someone less human each time. And then there was Emily. The day she'd returned from that last mission, Emily had been waiting at the airport. Small, nervous, holding a handmade sign that read, "Welcome home, Mom." Stephanie had barely stepped off the transport before Emily ran into her arms. It should have been a perfect moment. But when Emily touched her face, Stephanie flinched, not because of pain, because of instinct. The battlefield reflex still wired into her bones. The look in her daughter's eyes, confused, afraid, hurt, haunted her far longer than any explosion. That's when she knew. It was time to leave the war behind. Years later, after the cafeteria incident went viral, the Navy sent her a letter, a formal commendation. They called her a beacon of representation and integrity. She never replied. She didn't need medals anymore. But she kept one thing from that time, a dog tag with two names etched side by side, R. Ramirez and S. Brooks. She wore it on quiet days under her shirt, close to her heart. One Saturday morning, Emily found her mother sitting on the porch, eyes lost in the horizon again. "Dreams?" Emily asked softly. Stephanie nodded, "Same ones." "About him. About all of them." Emily sat beside her, knees pulled to her chest. "Does it ever stop?" Her mother smiled faintly. "No, you just learn to breathe around it." They sat in silence for a while, the kind that felt heavy but healing. Finally, Emily said, "I wish I could have seen you then, doing what you did." Stephanie chuckled. "You wouldn't have liked it much." "I think I would have been proud." Her mom turned to her, eyes softening. "Then I guess I did my job." Later that day, the doorbell rang. When Stephanie opened it, she froze. Standing there was a man she hadn't seen in over a decade, a broad-shouldered figure with a prosthetic arm and the unmistakable bearing of a SEAL. "Raven," he said with a grin, "heard you were alive." Stephanie's breath caught. "Holt." He saluted with his left hand. "Heard about your little school mission. You always had a flair for timing." "Don't start," she said, but smiled anyway. He handed her a small envelope. "Commander says hi, we're meeting up next week, wanted to see if you'd come." She hesitated. "It's been a long time." Holt nodded. "Yeah, but ghosts fade easier when you don't face them alone." He looked past her, spotting Emily hovering shyly near the hallway. "This her?" Stephanie nodded. "My daughter, Emily." Holt smiled warmly. "Your mom saved my life twice." Emily's eyes widened. "She told me about you." "Did she?" He chuckled. "She probably left out the part where she carried me half a mile while cussing me out the whole way." "Language," Stephanie warned. He raised his hands in mock surrender. "Still the same." The visit was short, but after he left, Stephanie stood by the window staring at the card he'd given her. A date, a place, a reunion of Echo 9. That night, she couldn't decide whether to go. Part of her wanted to see them again, to feel the connection only those who have been to war can understand. Another part was afraid, because reunions meant facing memories she'd spent years trying to bury. She sat at the kitchen table, the invitation beside her, her hands clasped tightly. Emily walked in, eyes sleepy. "You okay, Mom?" "Just thinking." About the letter. Stephanie smiled faintly. You always see too much. Emily leaned on the table. You should go. Her mom looked up. Why? Because maybe they need to see you, and maybe you need to forgive yourself. The words hit harder than they should have. Simple, pure, true. Stephanie reached out, brushing her daughter's cheek. You're too wise for your age. I had a good teacher, Emily whispered. A week later, Stephanie walked into a veterans hall on the outskirts of the city. The air smelled faintly of coffee and old wood polish. Inside were faces she thought she'd never see again. Some older, some changed, but all familiar. Holt was there, two others from her unit, and on the wall, a framed photo of Echo 9, smiling, dirty, alive. Ramirez's name etched beneath it. When they saw her, conversation stopped. Then Holt stepped forward and hugged her tight. Told you she'd come, he said, smiling through misty eyes. Someone handed her a glass of whiskey. Someone else raised a toast. To the ones who didn't make it, Holt said. They clinked glasses. Stephanie lifted hers, staring into the amber liquid that caught the light like fire. To the ones who did, she murmured. Later that night, when the stories faded and the hall emptied, she found herself standing before Ramirez's photo alone. She touched the frame gently. I carried you home, she whispered. I hope that counts for something. For a long moment, she stood there, the weight of everything pressing against her chest. Then from behind, Holt's voice, he'd be proud of you, we all are. She turned, tears glinting but unshed. You ever stop hearing it? He shook his head. No, but it gets quieter. When she returned home, Emily was waiting by the door. How was it? She asked softly. Stephanie took a long breath, hard but good. Emily smiled. Did you say goodbye? Her mom nodded, maybe for the first time. They hugged in the doorway, moonlight spilling across the floor. For once, Stephanie didn't flinch. She just held on. That night, as the house settled into sleep, Stephanie stepped onto the porch once more. The air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and distance. She looked up at the stars, bright, endless, the same ones that had watched over her in every country, every mission. She didn't speak, she didn't pray, she just breathed. Somewhere she imagined Ramirez laughing, Holt raising a glass, her team, scattered across the world, still connected by something invisible but unbreakable. And in that silence, she finally understood. War doesn't end when the shooting stops. It ends the day you stop running from the part of you that survived. Inside, Emily stirred in her sleep, dreaming of her mother standing in that same light, strong, scarred, and still fighting, but now for peace instead of survival. And though neither of them knew what tomorrow would bring, one thing was certain. The world might forget her mother's name. But Emily never would. Because real heroes don't need medals. They leave legacies in the quiet strength of those who remember them. How do you learn courage? From watching it or from living it? Emily Brooks had never thought much about that question before. But ever since her mother's quiet storm rolled through Lincoln High, courage wasn't just something she admired. It was something she could feel beneath her skin. Like a pulse she hadn't noticed until now. It started small. A week after the Day of the Seals, as students now called it, she saw a freshman being cornered by two upperclassmen near the lockers. Normally, she'd have kept walking, too afraid to draw attention, too used to hiding in silence. But something in her shifted. She heard her mother's words echoing in her mind. Truth doesn't need permission to exist. Before she could talk herself out of it, she stepped forward. Hey, she said, her voice shaking just slightly. Back off. The older boys turned, sizing her up with amused smirks. Or what? One of them asked. She didn't flinch, or you'll regret it. There was no threat in her tone, no bravado, just calm certainty, the same tone her mother used when she wanted a situation to stop before it started. Something about that steadiness disarmed them. After a tense pause, they scoffed, muttered something under their breath, and walked away. The freshman stared at her stunned. "Thanks." Emily nodded, heart pounding. "You're welcome." It wasn't much, but it was the first time she'd stood her ground. The first time she'd realized that courage wasn't loud. It was steady. At home, Stephanie noticed the change too. Her daughter walked taller now, spoke with more conviction. There was a quiet light in her eyes, a reflection of something Stephanie thought she'd left behind on the battlefield: resolve. They spent evenings together again, cooking, laughing softly, rebuilding the simple things war had once fractured. One night while washing dishes, Emily said, "You know, people still talk about what you did." Stephanie smirked. "I bet they do. They think it was brave." Her mother's hand stilled. "Bravery's overrated," she said. "It's usually just fear that's been given a mission." Emily tilted her head. "So you were scared that day?" "Terrified," Stephanie said, meeting her eyes. "But being scared doesn't mean you stop. It means you care enough to keep going anyway." Emily let that sink in, the rhythm of running water filling the silence between them. She thought about the kids she'd faced that day in the hallway, how her knees had trembled but she hadn't backed down. Maybe fear wasn't the enemy after all. Maybe it was the proof that you were still human. Weeks passed, the viral fame faded. But inside Lincoln High, the effect of that morning lingered like a quiet wind that had shifted direction. Teachers spoke differently. Students whispered less and listened more. Respect had become something people gave freely, not something earned through fear. Marcy, once the loudest of Emily's tormentors, had joined the volunteer group that helped veterans in the community. She'd even asked Stephanie if she could interview her for a school project about real heroism. Stephanie had agreed on one condition: no uniforms, no titles, just truth. The day of the interview, the classroom buzzed with anticipation. Cameras were set up, notebooks ready. Stephanie entered the room calm as ever, wearing jeans and a plain gray shirt. No medals, no makeup, just herself. Marcy smiled nervously. "Thank you for doing this, Mrs. Brooks." "Please," Stephanie said, sitting down. "It's just Stephanie." Marcy hesitated, glancing at her notes. How does someone become a Navy SEAL? I mean, it's usually men, right?" Stephanie smiled faintly. "Usually, but the ocean doesn't care who you are when you hit the water. Neither does war." Laughter rippled softly through the room. "But it's not about gender," she continued. "It's about endurance. They'll break you down until there's nothing left, then see if you still stand, if you still fight for the person beside you." Marcy looked up, eyes wide. "Did you ever think of quitting?" "Every day," Stephanie said quietly. "But I didn't. Not because I was the strongest, but because someone else was depending on me. That's what keeps you moving." Another student asked, "So, would you do it again?" Stephanie paused. "No." The room went still. She looked around, her voice soft but sharp. "Because my mission now isn't out there anymore. It's here, making sure my daughter and her generation don't need to carry what we did." Emily, sitting near the back, felt her chest tighten with pride. For once she wasn't invisible. She was the daughter of someone who had fought for peace, and who was still fighting for it in smaller, quieter ways. After the interview, Stephanie lingered near the classroom door. Marcy approached her nervously. "I wanted to say I'm sorry again for how I treated Emily." Stephanie studied her for a moment. "What changed your mind?" Marcy hesitated. "I guess I realized heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear tired eyes and still show up anyway." Stephanie smiled softly. "That's a good start." Then she added, "Just remember, respect doesn't come from fear, it comes from understanding." Marcy nodded. "I'll remember." That evening, the house felt peaceful in a way it hadn't in years. Emily sat on the couch, scrolling through photos of the interview, pausing on one where her mom was mid-laugh, genuine, unguarded. She hadn't seen that version of her mother since childhood. "Mom," she said quietly, "do you ever miss who you were before all this?" Stephanie looked up from the sink. "Before the Navy." Emily nodded. Her mother thought for a long moment. "Sometimes, but mostly I just miss the moments I didn't know were ending." Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" "The last breakfast before deployment. The last time your friend says, 'See you soon.' The last night you believe you're invincible. You never know when a moment becomes a memory." Her voice softened. "That's why I don't waste time proving who I was anymore. I'd rather live who I am now." Emily stared at her mother for a long time, realizing how many things she'd misunderstood. Stephanie wasn't distant because she didn't care. She was distant because she did. Because the things she'd seen, the people she'd lost, had taught her the value of silence. It wasn't coldness, it was reverence. A few days later, life handed Emily her own test. The school announced a public speaking contest, a chance for students to talk about someone who changed their life. Emily wanted to write about her mom, but fear whispered again. What if people thought she was just chasing sympathy? What if they mocked her again? She almost skipped it, until she remembered the letter she'd found in the attic, the one where her mother wrote, "The hardest battles are the ones that follow us home." Maybe this was one of them. That night she sat at her desk, staring at the blank page for hours. Then slowly she began to write, not about war, not about medals, but about silence, strength, and the kind of courage that never made headlines. The day of the contest arrived. The auditorium buzzed with chatter, bright lights glaring down from above. When her name was called, Emily's heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. She walked to the stage, gripping her paper, palms slick with sweat. Then she looked out into the crowd and saw her mother sitting in the front row. Calm, steady, smiling. Just like always. And suddenly, Emily wasn't afraid anymore. She took a deep breath. "My speech," she began softly, "isn't about a superhero, it's about my mom." A ripple of whispers moved through the crowd. "She doesn't wear a cape, she doesn't save the world with powers. She does it with patience, with silence, with scars that she hides so I don't have to see." She paused, eyes glistening. "People used to laugh when I said she was a Navy SEAL. I used to let them. But now I know the bravest thing she ever did wasn't fighting overseas. It was coming home and staying human." The auditorium was silent. Emily's voice wavered, but she kept going. "She taught me that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about standing up when fear tells you to sit down. It's about doing what's right even when no one believes you." When she finished, there was a heartbeat of stillness, then the sound of applause, swelling until it filled the room. Stephanie sat there, hands folded, eyes wet but smiling. She didn't clap at first. She just watched her daughter standing tall under the stage lights, her voice steady, her spirit strong. Then she rose slowly, and the whole crowd followed. A standing ovation. For a girl who'd once been invisible. That night after the awards were handed out, and Emily, to her surprise, had won first place, they drove home in silence. Not the kind of silence that hurt, but the kind that said everything words couldn't. When they reached the house, Emily turned to her mother. "You proud of me?" Stephanie smiled. "More than you'll ever know." "You think Dad would have been proud too?" Her mother hesitated, then nodded. "He'd have been in the front row, crying louder than anyone." Emily grinned. "Guess I take after you then." Her mom laughed softly. "Guess you do." They sat there for a while, engine off, headlights dim. And in that quiet glow, Stephanie realized something she hadn't in years. Her daughter wasn't just growing stronger. She was becoming the proof that the battles Stephanie fought, the losses she endured, had meant something. Maybe that was the point all along. You survive for the next generation. You fight so they don't have to. And sometimes, your greatest mission isn't on a battlefield. It's raising someone who knows how to stand tall in a world that tries to make them small. When do you stop protecting someone and start trusting what you taught them? That question haunted Stephanie Brooks more than she cared to admit. She had spent most of her life on the defensive, first as a soldier, then as a mother. Always scanning, always anticipating, always ready to shield Emily from the world's cruelty before it struck. But lately, she'd begun to realize, maybe the hardest part of being a warrior wasn't fighting battles. It was stepping aside once peace arrived. And peace, she knew, was fragile. The morning after Emily's speech, life felt ordinary again, dangerously ordinary. The sun was bright, the coffee hot, the world quiet, too quiet. As Stephanie leaned on the kitchen counter, flipping through the newspaper, she saw her daughter rushing around, stuffing notebooks into her backpack. "Big day?" Stephanie asked. Emily shrugged, smiling. "Sort of. They asked me to help organize the Veterans Day Assembly next week. Guess they thought I'd know someone who could speak." Her mom chuckled. "Imagine that." "Don't worry, I didn't volunteer you," Emily teased. "But they want to make it about what service really means, not just uniforms and flags. I thought maybe you could help me write something." Stephanie's smile softened. "I think we can do that." That week they sat together every night at the dining table, shaping words the way soldiers shape strategy, carefully, purposefully. "Don't make it about me," Stephanie said one evening. "Make it about everyone who serves, the ones no one sees." "You mean like medics, mechanics?" Emily asked. Her mother nodded. "And the ones who come home and still fight every day just to be normal again." Emily paused, pen hovering over paper. "Do you ever stop fighting, Mom?" Stephanie looked at her daughter, really looked. "I thought I did, but watching you, I think I finally started winning." By the end of the week, the speech was ready, honest, grounded, poetic in its simplicity. But not everyone liked it. At school, during rehearsal, one of the teachers, a man who'd never served, glanced at Emily's draft and frowned. "This part here," he said, tapping a line with his pen. "You mentioned that some veterans come home and still feel like they're at war. That might be too heavy for an assembly." Emily frowned. "But it's true." "Yes, but we want to keep it uplifting, patriotic, something the parents will clap for." Emily hesitated. "Isn't honesty patriotic too?" The teacher sighed. "Emily, we just need something safer. Maybe mention how proud your mom is to be an American and how service teaches teamwork. That's all people want to hear." She stared at him for a long moment, the words forming in her throat before she could stop them. "With respect, sir, my mom didn't fight so people could feel comfortable. She fought so people could live honestly." The teacher's expression tightened. "That's not your decision to make." "No," Emily said quietly, "but it's hers, and she already made it." She walked out of the room before he could reply, heart pounding in her chest. That evening, she told her mom everything. "I think I just got myself banned from the assembly," she said, half joking, half terrified. Stephanie didn't look angry, she looked proud. "You spoke your truth." "But he's in charge," Emily sighed. "They'll probably rewrite everything." Her mom leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Then we'll write it louder." Emily blinked. Louder. Sometimes the quietest words need the biggest stage. A few days later, the principal confirmed her fears. The teacher had replaced Emily's piece with something generic, patriotic, sanitized. Emily tried to smile, but her chest hurt. "It's fine," she said. "It's not worth the trouble." But Stephanie knew that tone too well. The same defeated tone soldiers used when they'd lost more than they could admit. That night she stared at the folded copy of the speech on the table, rereading the words her daughter had written. Simple, brave, true. And then an idea came to her, reckless maybe. But sometimes the right thing doesn't wait for permission. The morning of the assembly arrived. The gymnasium was packed. Flags hung from the rafters, a brass band warmed up softly, and the stage gleamed under harsh lights. Students filled the bleachers, parents lined the back rows. Emily sat in the audience, watching as the teacher rehearsed one last time on stage, his voice hollow, reading from the watered-down version she'd refused to give. She forced a smile. "Guess that's that," she muttered. Then she heard it, the soft rumble of engines outside. Her stomach dropped. "No," she whispered. The double doors at the back of the gym opened. And just like that first day in the cafeteria, the world seemed to stop. 30 Navy SEALs stepped inside, flanking a woman in a dark blue jacket. Stephanie Brooks. This time there were no speeches prepared, no formal introductions, just her, walking calmly, her presence commanding silence before she even reached the stage. The principal froze. "Ms. Brooks, what?" She held up a hand. "You wanted a real assembly, you'll have one." The crowd went still. Stephanie turned to the microphone, her voice steady but soft. "I wasn't invited to speak today," she began. "But I've learned something in life. Sometimes silence can sound like respect. Other times it sounds like fear." Her gaze swept across the audience, students, teachers, veterans, families. "My daughter wrote a speech for today. They told her it was too honest, too heavy, too real. I'm here to read it anyway." Emily's heart hammered as she watched her mother unfold the paper. Stephanie began to read. Her voice wasn't polished or theatrical, it was human. "Courage isn't medals or flags. It's waking up every morning and choosing to live when the world has already taken something from you. Some soldiers don't come home in pieces. Some come home whole, but never the same. And the families who wait for them, they serve too, in silence, in patience, in love that never stops showing up." By the time she finished, the gym was completely still. No clapping, no coughing, just quiet reverence. Then slowly, people began to rise. One by one. First a veteran in the back row, then another, then the students. And finally, the teacher who had tried to silence the words in the first place. He stood, eyes wet, and whispered, "I was wrong." After the ceremony, people crowded around, shaking Stephanie's hand, thanking her. But she brushed them off gently. "Thank my daughter," she said. "She's the reason I found my voice again." Outside, under the bright November sun, Emily ran up and threw her arms around her. "You did it again," she laughed through tears. "You turned the whole school upside down." Stephanie smiled, brushing her hair back. "No, we did, and this time it was your words." Emily shook her head. "You didn't have to do that, Mom." "I know," Stephanie said quietly, "but you stood up for me once. It was my turn." They stood there for a long time, surrounded by people but alone in their moment. A mother who'd fought wars in silence. A daughter who'd learned how to speak truth without shouting. 2 generations of strength, different battles, same courage. That evening, when the crowds were gone and the medals packed away, Stephanie sat alone in her car for a long time before turning the key. She wasn't thinking about the applause, or the teacher, or the principal's awkward gratitude. She was thinking about the letter she'd written years ago, the one Emily had found. She had written it after Ramirez's death, believing she might not live long enough to explain herself. But tonight she realized something. She didn't need the letter anymore. Her daughter understood her now, not as a myth, not as a legend, but as a person. Flawed, fragile, unbreakable. Later she joined Emily on the porch. The night was cool, stars scattered across the black sky. "Mom," Emily said softly, "you think people will remember today?" Her mother smiled faintly. "They'll remember how they felt, that's what lasts." They sat together in the quiet, the sound of crickets filling the space between their words. Finally, Emily said, "You always talk about fighting battles. How do you know when you've won one?" Stephanie looked out into the darkness. "When you stop needing to." Her voice softened. "Victory isn't about defeating something. It's about finding peace after it's over. Emily leaned her head on her shoulder. Then I guess we both won today. Her mother smiled, wrapping an arm around her. Yeah, she whispered, we did. Inside the house, the folded speech lay on the kitchen table, the words illuminated by the soft glow of a single lamp. Words written by a daughter, spoken by a mother, and lived by both. Sometimes battles are fought on fields of dirt and blood. Sometimes they're fought in classrooms, in hearts, in moments when truth is told despite the fear. And sometimes the bravest soldiers aren't the ones who go to war. They're the ones who raise the next generation not to need one. How far does courage travel once it's spoken aloud? Sometimes words are like ripples on still water. They start small, invisible at first, then spread farther than anyone expects. For weeks after the assembly, Lincoln High changed again. Not in a loud way, not in banners or slogans, but in how people acted, how they looked at one another, how they listened. Students began showing up to volunteer at the Veterans Center. Teachers started inviting guest speakers who talked about real service, not just heroics, but healing. And Emily Brooks, once the girl who sat alone at lunch, found herself surrounded by people who wanted to learn, not laugh. It was strange, humbling, beautiful, and a little terrifying. Because change, even good change, draws attention. 2 weeks later, Stephanie got a call from an unfamiliar number. Mrs. Brooks. Yes, speaking. This is Colonel Harris, Pentagon Public Relations. We've seen the footage from your school assembly. The department would like to invite you and your daughter to speak at a regional veterans event next month. Honorary guests, if you're willing. Stephanie went quiet. She wasn't used to attention, at least not this kind. That's kind of you, she said cautiously, but I'm not sure I'm the right person. With respect, ma'am, that's exactly why you are. When she told Emily that night, her daughter nearly dropped her fork. Washington wants us, Mom, that's huge. Stephanie smiled weakly. It's something. You have to say yes. Her mother hesitated. Do I? Emily frowned. You always tell me to face what scares me. Stephanie chuckled under her breath. I walked into enemy fire, Emily. You think microphones are scarier. Emily raised an eyebrow. You didn't hesitate when you walked into my school with 30 SEALs. That was different. Why? Because I was protecting you. Emily smiled softly. Maybe this time you're protecting someone else, someone watching who needs to know what strength looks like. That silenced her, because she knew Emily was right. The following weeks were a blur. Invitations, calls, emails. Old faces resurfacing. Reporters, former teammates, even military historians wanting to document her story. Stephanie didn't like it. She'd spent years trying to not be seen. But every time she considered backing out, she'd find Emily's speech folded on her desk. And she'd remember, silence wasn't always strength. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Stephanie sat at the Veterans Center again. The same small circle of worn-out faces, the same tired jokes. But today, something new. A teenager barely 16 sat among them, hoodie up, nervous. His name was Jake. His father had served. Hadn't come home the same. He didn't talk much, just stared at the floor until Stephanie asked, You here for him? He shrugged. Guess so. Mom says it'll help. Does it? She asked gently. He hesitated. He doesn't talk to anyone, not even me. I don't get it. He's home, but it's like he's still over there. Stephanie nodded slowly. Sometimes coming home isn't the same as returning. He frowned. That makes sense to you. More than I wish it did. She told him softly about the desert, about her team, about Ramirez. Not the war stories people like to hear, but the quiet ones no one told. By the time she finished, Jake was staring at her with something like understanding. Did you ever stop missing them? He asked. No, she said, but the missing becomes less about pain, more about gratitude. You start living for them, not just without them. He nodded slowly. When he left that day, he said something that lingered in her mind long after. My dad might not talk to me, but maybe now I know how to listen. That night, Stephanie sat at the kitchen table, hands folded. Emily watched her quietly. You're thinking about saying yes, aren't you? Her mom smiled faintly. You ever get tired of being right? Never. They both laughed. Then softly, Stephanie said, if I do this speech, I want you to stand with me. Me? Emily blinked. Why me? Because the story isn't mine anymore. It's ours. 3 days later, the email was sent. Subject: acceptance. Brooks' family to attend Veterans Unity event. And just like that, everything became real. The event was scheduled for late spring. As the date drew closer, Stephanie's old instincts stirred again, the ones that measured everything in contingencies and escape routes. She trained herself not to scan crowds, not to sit facing exits, but some habits never died. Even peace required discipline. The night before the flight, she couldn't sleep. She stood on the porch, staring at the stars, those same cold witnesses that had followed her from battlefield to battlefield. Behind her, the screen door creaked. Emily stepped out, wrapped in a blanket. You okay? Yeah, Stephanie said quietly, just thinking. About tomorrow. About everything. Her daughter joined her, resting her head on her shoulder. You always say you left the Navy to live in peace. Maybe this is part of it, making peace with the past. Stephanie smiled faintly. You know, sometimes you sound older than me. I learned from the best. They stood together in the cool night breeze, neither speaking for a while. Then Emily whispered, do you ever think the world forgets people like you? Her mom exhaled slowly. The world always forgets, sweetheart. That's what makes remembering so important. The next morning, they boarded the plane. It had been years since Stephanie had flown anywhere, and the sound of the engines brought back old memories, too many of them. She closed her eyes, gripping the armrest. Emily noticed, you okay? Fine, she lied. But the truth was she was. She could still feel the vibrations in her bones, the ones that used to mean deployment, danger, survival mode. It took all her strength to breathe slowly, deliberately, until the sky steadied around her. The event was held in a vast auditorium near the Capitol. Hundreds of veteran, officials, and families filled the seats. When Stephanie and Emily arrived, cameras flashed, reporters swarmed. But as she stood there, she felt something strange. She wasn't nervous. She was calm, not because she was ready, but because she wasn't alone. Her daughter stood beside her, holding her speech, smiling softly. You've got this, Emily whispered. Stephanie looked at her and said, no, we do. When they took the stage, the lights were blinding. The applause faded, and Stephanie stepped to the microphone. She didn't look at her notes. She didn't need them. People ask me what it means to serve, she began quietly. They think it's about orders, about missions, but service doesn't end when the uniform comes off. She paused. Sometimes it starts after. The room listened, utterly still. I've seen the best and worst of humanity. I've seen courage that never makes headlines. And I've seen what happens when silence replaces gratitude. But tonight, I'm not here as a soldier. I'm here as a mother, because everything I fought for, everything I lost, was so my daughter could stand where I am now, unafraid to speak her truth. She gestured for Emily to step forward. The crowd watched as Emily joined her, hand trembling slightly as she took the mic. My mom once told me that courage is fear that's been given a mission, Emily said. I didn't understand that until I watched her live it. She doesn't talk about war much, but I've learned that peace has its soldiers too. They just fight different battles. She glanced at her mother, smiling. She taught me that bravery isn't loud, it's the decision to keep showing up. The audience rose to their feet, applause echoing like thunder. Stephanie turned to her daughter, eyes glistening. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "I'm proud of us," Emily replied. After the ceremony, a young Marine approached them. Barely 20, uniform crisp, eyes haunted. "Ma'am," he said softly to Stephanie, "your words, they helped. I've been trying to figure out how to come home. Maybe now I can start." Stephanie placed a hand on his shoulder. "Coming home is the end of the fight, son. It's just a new kind." He nodded, emotion catching in his throat. "Thank you, ma'am." As he walked away, Stephanie turned to Emily. "That's why we came," she said quietly. On the flight back, Emily slept against her shoulder while the clouds drifted below them. Stephanie watched her daughter breathe, peaceful, unscarred, free. And for the first time in years, she felt something lift, a weight she hadn't even realized she was still carrying. Ramirez Holt, the ghosts, the guilt. Maybe she couldn't change what happened, but she'd done something better. She changed what came after. Back home, the next morning was quiet again. No cameras, no applause, just sunlight through the blinds and the smell of coffee. As Stephanie stood at the sink, she caught sight of something out the window. Jake, the teen from the Veterans Center, walking his father slowly down the sidewalk. His dad's steps were uneven, his hands trembling, but his eyes were open, aware, alive. Stephanie smiled. The ripples had spread. Later, she and Emily sat on the porch, as they always did when words weren't enough. "Mom," Emily asked softly, "you ever think you'll stop missing the Navy?" Stephanie shook her head. "No, but I stopped needing it." Her daughter smiled. "So what now?" Her mother looked out at the setting sun. "Now we live, for them, for us, for everyone still learning what peace feels like." A breeze swept through, carrying the faint scent of rain and the distant hum of a jet overhead. And in that sound, familiar, once terrifying, Stephanie finally heard something different. Not war. Freedom. Because some missions never end. They just change shape. And the bravest soldiers aren't the ones who fight the longest. They're the ones who find the courage to put the weapon down and keep their heart open. When does healing stop being recovery and start becoming purpose? Stephanie Brooks had spent years learning to survive, but for the first time, she was learning how to live. After the Washington event, life didn't go back to normal, it grew into something new. People began reaching out, not for autographs or fame, but for help, for truth, for connection. Veterans called her, students emailed, mothers wrote letters saying, "Thank you for showing my daughter what real strength looks like." It was overwhelming, humbling, and terrifying all at once. But Stephanie didn't run from it, not this time. She turned her small moments of peace into something larger, a purpose she could build. A month later, she started volunteering full-time at the Veterans Center, not just to help the men and women who'd served, but to help their families too. She taught workshops on transitioning to civilian life, ran counseling groups, and, at Emily's suggestion, started a program for teens of veterans called Next Mission. It wasn't glamorous. It was quiet, real, the kind of work that required listening more than talking. Emily often joined her after school, helping set up chairs or make coffee for the guests. One afternoon, while Stephanie was cleaning up after a meeting, Emily found her sitting in one of the empty chairs, staring at the flag on the wall. "You okay, Mom?" Stephanie smiled softly, "Just thinking. About them. Always." Emily sat beside her. "You miss it, don't you? The missions, the structure, the purpose." Her mother considered that. "Sometimes, but purpose changes, sweetheart. What used to be about survival, now it's about meaning." Emily tilted her head. "What's the difference?" Stephanie turned to her. "Survival is breathing because you have to. Meaning is breathing because you want to." Emily smiled. That sounds like something you tell a class. Her mother chuckled. Maybe I will. That weekend, they hosted their first open workshop for veterans' families. The room was small, 20 people, folding chairs, and the smell of instant coffee. Jake was there, sitting beside his father, who looked fragile but alert. When it was Stephanie's turn to speak, she didn't use notes. I don't have answers, she began. Just experience. I learned that coming home isn't a finish line, it's another battlefield. The mission changes, but the need for connection doesn't. Her voice was low, even, every word deliberate. When you've lived through chaos, silence feels unnatural. But it's in that silence you start to rebuild, piece by piece, breath by breath, until one day you stop counting the distance between who you were and who you're becoming. She paused, looked around the room. You're not broken, she said gently. You're just carrying stories too heavy for one lifetime. Emily watched from the corner, her throat tight. She'd never seen her mother like this, not as a soldier or a survivor, but as something else entirely. A healer. Afterward, people stayed to talk. A woman cried softly as she thanked Stephanie. Jake's father shook her hand, voice trembling. You gave me my son back. Stephanie smiled. No, you gave yourself back, that's the harder part. Later, when everyone was gone, Emily turned to her mom. Do you realize what you're doing? Stephanie raised an eyebrow, cleaning up. No, Emily said, grinning, changing lives. Her mom rolled her eyes, trying to hide the emotion rising behind them. One coffee pot at a time, maybe. But deep down, she knew Emily was right. As the months passed, word spread. More veterans came, more families joined. Local news stations began covering the story. Former Navy SEAL launches program to help families heal. Stephanie didn't care about the headlines. What mattered was the people. Each week the circle grew wider. New faces, new stories. Some came angry, some broken, some silent. But they all left with something lighter in their eyes. Emily became her mother's right hand, organizing schedules, designing flyers, helping record the stories of those who wanted to share. But she wasn't just helping, she was learning. Learning what it meant to stand beside pain without being crushed by it. Learning how to listen, to understand, to carry without owning. One night, after a long meeting, Stephanie and Emily drove home under a sky of silver clouds. You ever think about joining the military? Stephanie asked suddenly. Emily blinked. Me? No, I mean, I admire what you did, but I don't think I could. Her mother nodded. That's okay. You don't need to fight the same way I did. Emily smiled softly. Then how do I fight? By doing what I can't anymore, Stephanie said. By building instead of defending. By creating instead of surviving. Emily thought about that for a long time. You think I could ever be as strong as you? Her mom reached over, squeezing her hand. You already are, you just use it differently. Summer came, the center expanded. And with it, a challenge Stephanie didn't see coming. One morning she arrived to find a stack of letters waiting on her desk. Most were thank yous, but one stood out. No return address. She opened it carefully. You talk about healing, but some of us never got that chance. Some of us lost everything, while people like you came home to applause. You think you know pain. You don't. You left others behind. There was no signature, just anger pressed into every line. She stared at it for a long time. Her hands shook slightly. It wasn't the first time she'd faced criticism, but this felt different, personal. Like someone who'd been there, someone who remembered Iron Veil. That night the nightmares returned. Sand, fire, the sound of shouting. Ramirez's hand slipping from hers. She woke gasping, sweat slick on her skin. The letter still lay on her nightstand, mocking her. Emily found her in the kitchen an hour later, sitting in the dark with a mug of cold coffee. Mom! Stephanie looked up, forcing a smile. Couldn't sleep. Emily sat beside her, Was it the letter? Stephanie didn't answer. Do you know who sent it? Her mother shook her head. Doesn't matter. Of course it matters, Emily said gently. You always tell me to face what scares me. Stephanie chuckled softly. You've gotten good at using my words against me. Only when they're right. The next day, she returned to the Veterans Center early. She sat alone for hours, thinking, remembering, breathing through the ghosts. Finally, she stood, took a pen and wrote a reply, even if she'd never send it. You're right, some of us made it back and some didn't. I've carried that guilt every day since, but I'm still here, and as long as I am, I'll spend every breath honoring those who aren't. She folded the note, placed it under the flag on the wall and whispered, For you, Ramirez. It wasn't forgiveness, it was acceptance. That night she told Emily the truth. About Iron Veil. About Ramirez. About the part of the mission that had gone wrong, the one no one outside her unit ever knew. Emily listened, silent, tears sliding down her face. When Stephanie finished, she said softly, You were trying to save him. Her mother nodded, and I couldn't. Emily reached out, taking her hand. But you saved so many others, including me. Stephanie's voice broke. I just wish that was enough. It is, Emily said, because you didn't stop there. You turned that pain into something good, and that's the hardest thing anyone can do. Her mother closed her eyes, a tear finally slipping free. Maybe that's our mission now, she whispered, turning ghosts into light. In the weeks that followed, Stephanie found peace in movement again, not in battle drills or orders but in purpose. She taught veterans how to reintegrate. She spoke to schools about empathy. She even started a new initiative with Emily's help, pairing teens with veterans for storytelling sessions, where both sides could learn what courage sounded like in someone else's voice. And slowly, without realizing it, mother and daughter built something extraordinary. A bridge between generations. A living tribute. A quiet revolution built on kindness, truth, and the simple act of showing up. One afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Emily walked through the center's main room and paused at a wall covered in photos. Veterans, families, notes of thanks. At the very top hung a small plaque. The Next Mission, founded by Stephanie and Emily Brooks. Beneath it, in smaller letters. For those who served, for those who wait, for those who keep going. She smiled. Looks good up there, she said. Her mother stood beside her, hands in her pockets. You did most of it. We both did. Stephanie's gaze softened. You know, this was supposed to be a story about me. Emily grinned. Maybe it still is, just the next chapter. Her mom chuckled. Fair enough. They stood together, the golden light painting their faces in warmth and shadow. And for once there was no pain, no ghosts, just peace. Real earned peace. Because sometimes, survival is the first mission. But living, that's the second. And it takes just as much courage. How do you measure a legacy? In medals that tarnish, or in lives quietly changed? For Stephanie Brooks, it wasn't hard to answer anymore. Months had passed since the letter, since the nightmares, since she'd finally told her daughter the truth. The world had moved on, but she and Emily had found something worth staying for: purpose, peace, each other. The Veterans Center was busier than ever now. The Next Mission had become more than a program. It was a family, a living reminder that healing wasn't a destination, it was a road they walked together. Every week, new faces appeared. Every week, Stephanie sat across from strangers and watched something shift behind their eyes. The moment shame gave way to understanding, and silence began to speak. She learned that not all wars left scars you could see. Some just left people waiting to feel whole again. And somehow, helping others find that wholeness helped her find her own. It was late autumn when the first storm of the season rolled in. Wind rattled the windows, rain whispered against the glass, and the center glowed warm with the hum of laughter in coffee mugs. Emily was at the back table, editing photos for a local magazine story titled, "The Seal Who Taught Her Town to Heal." She looked up at her mom. "They want to feature you on the cover." Stephanie groaned, "Oh, for God's sake." Emily grinned. "You'd look great in print, rugged, wise." "Old," her mother muttered. "Strong," Emily countered. That made her pause, then smile. "That's better." Later that evening, as the guests trickled out, Stephanie noticed Jake and his father lingering by the door. "Hey," she called softly, "you two headed home?" Jake nodded. "Yeah, just wanted to say thanks. Dad been different lately." He smiles again. His father added quietly, "My son and I talk now. About small things, it helps." Stephanie nodded. "That's how it starts. Small things build big bridges." They shook hands, and as they left, Emily turned to her mom. "You're really good at this, you know." "At what?" "Fixing people." Stephanie's smile faded to something softer. "I don't fix them. I just remind them they're not broken." That night, as the rain deepened, they closed up the center and drove home. The streets shimmered under streetlights, their reflections turning the asphalt into liquid gold. Emily rested her head against the window, watching the city blur by. "Mom, do you ever think about Dad?" Stephanie's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "Every day." Emily nodded. "I don't remember him much." Her mother exhaled slowly. "He was quiet like you, and stubborn like me." "Was he proud of you?" Stephanie smiled faintly. "He was proud of us. He always said we were the best thing he ever did right." They drove in silence for a while. Then Emily said softly, "I think you'd both be proud of what you built." Stephanie blinked hard. "You mean we built?" Emily grinned. "Right, we." The next morning the rain had stopped. The air smelled of pine and fresh beginnings. When they arrived at the center, something unusual was waiting. A large package, no name, no return address. Stephanie hesitated, instincts flaring, old habits never died. She examined it carefully before cutting it open. Inside was a folded flag, a faded trident patch, and a letter. Emily leaned closer as her mom opened it. "Stephanie, he would have wanted you to have this. Ramirez talked about you a lot after that mission. Said you were the only one who made him believe coming home was possible. I found this among his things when I visited his family last year. Figured it was time it came full circle. You didn't fail him. You carried him farther than most ever could." "Holt." Stephanie stared at the letter for a long time, her throat tightening. She unfolded the flag, running her fingers over the worn fabric. Then she looked at Emily, who stood silent, understanding everything without needing words. Her mother whispered, "He's home now." Emily reached out and took her hand. "So are you." That night Stephanie couldn't sleep again. But it wasn't the restless kind, it was the kind filled with reflection. She walked outside, barefoot on the cold porch, holding Ramirez's trident between her fingers. The stars were out, brilliant and infinite, the same ones that had watched her through every mission, every loss, every moment of courage she hadn't thought she had. "Thank you," she murmured into the night. Not to anyone in particular, to all of them. The ghosts, the friends, the ones she'd carried and the ones who'd carried her. And for the first time, the silence didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a promise kept. A week later, the Veterans Center held a memorial gathering for lost comrades. Dozens attended, old uniforms, old faces, new peace. Stephanie stood at the front of the room beside Emily, the folded flag resting on the podium. She didn't prepare a speech this time. She didn't need to. "When we lose someone," she said softly, "we don't carry them in our pain, we carry them in how we live. Ramirez taught me that. Holt reminded me. My daughter proved it." She paused, her eyes finding Emily's. "We don't heal by forgetting. We heal by honoring. Every story told, every tear shed, every life rebuilt, it all counts. That's how we win. The crowd rose in silence, heads bowed. No applause, no fanfare, just quiet reverence, the kind that didn't need music to be holy. That evening, after everyone left, Stephanie stood alone in the dim hall, tracing the names etched into the memorial wall. Her fingers stopped on one, R. Ramirez. "Rest easy," she whispered. "Mission complete." She turned to leave and saw Emily standing at the doorway watching her. "Ready to go, Mom." Stephanie smiled. "Yeah, let's go home." The drive back was slow and peaceful, the sun melting into the horizon. Emily glanced over. "So what now?" Her mother thought about it. "Now, we keep going, maybe take the next mission national, help more families, maybe even write a book." Emily grinned. "You, writing a book?" "I've got stories." "I know," Emily said. "I've lived half of them." Stephanie laughed quietly. "Guess we're co-authors then." Later that night, as they sat on the porch sipping tea, the wind carried the faint smell of salt ocean air drifting inland. It reminded Stephanie of training days, of waves, of pain and purpose. "Funny," she said softly. "All my life I thought strength was about fighting." Emily looked up. "And now?" "Now I think it's about staying. Staying long enough to rebuild. Staying soft when the world tells you to harden. Staying kind when life gives you every reason not to be." She turned to her daughter, smiling gently. "You taught me that." Emily blushed. "You taught me first." They sat in silence again, watching the horizon fade into twilight. And in that fading light, something unspoken passed between them, something sacred and eternal. Not just love, not just gratitude. Legacy. The next morning the world moved as usual. Cars honked, dogs barked, and the mailmen waved. Ordinary life, the kind Stephanie had once thought impossible. She stood by the window, holding her coffee, watching Emily leave for school. Before she turned the corner, Emily looked back and waved. It was a small gesture, simple, but in it, Stephanie saw everything she'd ever fought for, every reason she'd survived. She waved back, smiling through tears. "Lesson learned," she whispered. Later that day, she pinned Ramirez's trident on the wall of the Veterans Center, right above the plaque that bore her and Emily's names. The metal gleamed faintly in the sunlight, a quiet beacon for anyone who walked through those doors seeking peace. Beneath it, she placed a small wooden sign with words Emily had written for her months ago. "Courage is not loud, it whispers I'm still here." She stepped back, looking at it for a long moment, then nodded to herself. Because that was the truth. She was still here. And so were the people she'd carried. In memory. In purpose. In love. As the years went on, the story of the SEAL mom and her daughter became something larger than either of them. Not a viral clip, not a headline, but a legend whispered in schools, shared in classrooms, told by veterans to their children as proof that the quiet ones often make the loudest difference. And whenever someone asked Stephanie how it all began, she'd just smile and say, "It started when someone mocked my daughter's truth, and ended when we both stopped needing to prove it." Then, after a thoughtful pause, she'd add, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." That night, after locking the center, she turned off the last light and stood by the door, breathing in the stillness. No uniforms. No ranks. No noise. Just peace. The kind she'd spent a lifetime earning and finally found. Because some stories end with victory. Others end with understanding. But the greatest ones, the ones that last, end with grace.